Okay, I think we've got quite a few people in, so we're just going to go ahead and get started. If you know anyone that's joining a little bit late, or if you miss any of the webinar, have to leave early, we do record these. It takes us a little while for the turnover to get them edited, but then we put them onto our YouTube channel at Seek the MEEC on YouTube. Otherwise, we will go ahead and get started. So welcome. I recognize quite a few of those names, so welcome back for those of you who have been here before. For those of you who have not, we are the Marine Environmental Education Center located in Hollywood Beach, Florida. And unfortunately, right now, we are still closed. We are a very small facility for those who are not familiar with the site, and it's just not possible for us to socially distance at this moment in time. We are making plans to move forward and hopefully open soon. So keep an eye on our social media and we will let everyone know when that happens. But until we could do that, we are trying to provide some really cool resources for everyone else who's stuck at home and wants to learn a little bit more about the marine science world. So we started this webinar series. It is every single Saturday from 1 to 2 p.m. And we've reached out to all of our science friends that we know, asking them, what do they think people want to learn about? What do they want to tell people about and educate the public about? So we are lucky enough today to be working with one of our very own MEEC interns, Taylor Burke. Taylor is currently an undergraduate at Nova Southeastern University. She is going for her Bachelor's of Science. And today she is talking to us a little bit about red tide, which for those of you who are from Florida, you've definitely heard about. They are a significant yearly thing that happens here. But a lot of people don't actually know what causes them, what does it actually mean when there's a red tide and what we could do to help. So Taylor's going to explain that to us today. Everyone is muted and everyone's cameras are off, and that's just so you can most clearly hear and see Taylor. But if you do have any questions, comments, concerns, or if you have any technical issues, please throw them into the chat. Carly and I are both here today. We are going to be monitoring the chat, and if you have any technical issues, just let us know and we will try to help from afar. But at the end, Taylor will get to all of your questions. So if you have questions about the material or about the MEEC, just throw it in there. I think that is about it from me. So whenever you're ready, Taylor, feel free to take it away.
Hello, everyone. I am Taylor. I'm giving you a red tide presentation today. I hope everyone is so excited to talk about red tide. I know I am. My passion is dinoflagellates. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started. If you have any questions, feel free to just put them in the chat. I'll get to them at the end. Okay, so red tide. There's a poem from Edgar Allan Poe, and it writes about the Red Death. And the Red Death is this story about this demon monster kind of just spread of plague that enters this party and just annihilates everyone. You can see here in the picture, it's just absolutely devastating. So this is kind of how fish see red tide in the perspective of them. It just comes in, it depletes all the oxygen, everyone's just dies. It's really scary and awful. So red tide is a naturally occurring event that has been made worse by human pollution in recent years that needs to be addressed in order to preserve South Florida ecosystems, marine life, and human inhabitants. Now, red tide doesn't only affect marine life or the ecosystem, it also affects humans because there's toxins that release whenever there's a red tide in effect. I'm sure we all know, we get those notifications from the Weather Channel, don't go to the beach because there's a red tide. So what is a red tide? A lot of people don't really know. They kind of just think it's seaweed. It's just this weird thing that happens in the ocean sometimes. So it's actually a dinoflagellate called Cranobravus. And dinoflagellates are eukaryotic organisms. They're single-celled, kind of like a bacteria, but they photosynthesize. So they draw nutrients from the sun. They use all that kind of stuff. They're a primary producer in our oceans, and they're really good for carbon sinks. Now, why Cranobravus is different than these blue ones over here. These blue ones we'll get to later, but right now let's focus on the Cranobravus. So they feed off of nutrients and sunlight. So the way that the dinoflagellates kind of reproduce, they multitude really quickly because when there's nutrients in the water, they use it as food and they have these blooms. So these blooms, the harmful algae blooms. So this is all these little organisms. These are microscopic, teeny tiny, can't even see them, but they just flourish in these huge blooms that just cover all across the ocean for miles and miles. And they're very dense and they can cause reef smothering if they get too dense. So these are all pictures of red tide in Florida. This is off the West Coast. This is also West Coast. This is on the East Coast. So these are all taken from the 2018 bloom. I'm not sure if everyone remembers that one, but it was really devastating. We lost a lot of fish that year, and red tide just exploded. So it can be really beautiful, but it's also very dangerous. So why is it bad? Oh, I have a little video to share. Oh, hold on one moment to play through the ad. Doo-doo-doo.
Butter knife.
This is a man. 9 beloved bottlenose dolphins have washed up dead in just the last week. The latest victims of the toxic red tide along Florida's west coast.
We have had a few rescues, but primarily we're seeing a lot of mortality.
While the algae bloom happens almost annually, this is the longest outbreak in over a decade, killing turtles, manatees, and other sea life.
We've picked up 16 turtles in the last 24 hours, so it doesn't feel like there's an end in sight.
The red tide hitting beaches from Tampa to Naples. It's a naturally occurring algae in the ocean that can grow out of control and produce dangerous toxins. Also poisoning Florida's water, blue-green algae, choking freshwater canals and waterways inland. It's caused in part by pesticides and urban runoff and aggravated by dams releasing water from Lake Okeechobee.
Just the idea of being around something that could make my son sick is really a big concern of mine.
The water smells terrible and threatens people too, causing respiratory problems, skin rashes, and nausea.
I kind of get like whiffs every now and then. I start coughing and it hurts, sucks.
As the toxic algae threatens wildlife, tourism, and people, scientists say they don't know how long this could last. Nature will have to take its course.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channels.
Okay, so that's really scary, you know, having one of these algal blooms happen in your area. You can't go to the beach, and if you do, you get all, you get rashes, and your eyes are all itchy, and it's not fun. It's not fun for the fish too. So, yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the red tide blooms in Florida. So how are they really caused? They're caused from agriculture runoff and pesticides. So what happens is in some of these, in a lot of the fertilizers that are used, there's excess phosphorus. And phosphorus is a limited resource naturally in lakes and places where algae tend to bloom naturally. But with all of these excess fertilizers with the phosphorus, it creates like a magnitude and an overload. So then these blooms just absolutely explode because they're having so much, and so much of something isn't good. It creates an imbalance. So I know we all remember these red tides. So these are just some pictures, and to show that it happens primarily in Florida a lot because we have mainly agriculture, and Lake Okeechobee filters right into the Gulf and to the Atlantic side. So this is another picture of one of these, of the 2018 bloom, which is one of the biggest that Florida's ever seen. And yeah, it caused a lot of deaths. And why it causes these deaths is the brevetoxin. So Carina brevis specifically has a brevetoxin, and it causes depletion of oxygen in the water. And it, so when the oxygen is depleted, all of marine life uses oxygen to breathe. So they basically suffocate underwater, and then they wash up. Like this turtle washed up, and then this poor whale shark, which is so sad to see wash up on our beaches. And it just, it's so bad. This picture is interesting to me because if you remember the Edgar Allan Poe picture in the beginning, this looks a lot like those party guests, right? I mean, their eyes are all not there. It's kind of morbid to talk about red tide, but it's the truth of it. It really causes all of these fish kills. And it's to fish, it's really scary. They don't know when it happens. They don't really understand why because they're fish. But all of a sudden, they're just dead. So people can become infected from them. And I'm sure you maybe have seen these if you've gone to the beach, the notice signs that it's, you can't really go to the beach during a red tide because of the brevetoxin. So when you breathe it in, it causes like in your lungs, I don't really have to explain it, but your lungs get itchy, you can't breathe because there's no oxygen in the air. So you're out of breath, your eyes get itchy, you start to get really red because your blood is kind of reacting to not having any oxygen around you. So you're not suffocating, but it's really dangerous. That's why you're not supposed to go to a beach during a red tide. So it can actually be dangerous after a red tide has passed, because once the dinoflagellates die, they are filtered through by filter feeders like shellfish. And then if you eat the shellfish, you can consume the brevitoxin and then you might have to be hospitalized. It's not a serious risk for most people, but if you have respiratory problems or any underlying illnesses, it can be really dangerous to consume intoxicated shellfish. And it's also harmful for the animals too, because a lot of them can feel the effects of a red tide even after it's cleared. So how can we help? Well, we can start by cleaning up pet waste, because that's a nutrient and causes runoff. One of the main reasons why red tide has gotten so intense and lasts a lot longer than they have naturally is because of all the excess runoff. So Florida is an agricultural state. Almost like half the state is farms, and all that water has to get drained somewhere. I mean, we all have watched Finding Nemo, and we all know that all drains lead to the ocean. So all drains do lead to the ocean, and if there's excess nutrients in that water, it creates these algae blooms. So this is one of the canals in a sugarcane farm in the middle of Florida, and it's all green. It's not supposed to be green, it's supposed to be blue. Over here, we can also see how all of those nutrients just get absolutely flooded into the water. And so one thing that we can do is try to prevent any more runoff from happening. So we can do that by watching what kind of fertilizers we put into our grasses. So this is a very important thing to take out of the presentation, because if we all do our part to buy phosphorus-free fertilizers, it can really deplete the level and the severity of red tide for further purpose. So with that being said, how do you know if a fertilizer is phosphorus-free? So if there's a 0 in the middle of your fertilizer, it doesn't have any phosphorus, because these numbers each represent a level of nutrient that's in your fertilizer. So you want to try to find ones that are 0. These ones are all from Ace Hardware, very local. You can go get them. Your grass will be beautiful and there won't be any runoff, which is what we all need. You can also plant more natural flora and fauna in your yards, because runoff is stopped by plants, because the plants will take in that nutrients and they'll begin to flourish. Your yard will look beautiful and you can attract butterflies. Your lawn can be super healthy. You know, you can have more clean air around you, and it prevents more runoff. So what is being done already? Because I know we talked about how bad red tide is and how it's just devastating to the ecosystem, the environment, to people, but what's already being done? Because this issue is very serious. So a lot of our officials have seen that. So our governor, Ron DeSantis, has announced appointments to the Red Tide Task Force. This was implemented in 2019 after our devastating 2018 red tide. So some laws have been passed, some legislations are in order to help regulate the pesticides and fertilizers that are used in our agriculture, but there still isn't being a lot to enforce them, because you can create laws, but sometimes if they're not being enforced, the problem doesn't really stop so much. But the Red Tide Task Force is a collection of scientists that are studying red tide. They're figuring out what you can do to try to prevent it further, what's going on with it, different ways to prevent it, all that good stuff. So this is amazing. It's definitely a step in the right direction, but it definitely takes a community effort, because red tide is a huge, huge problem, because it can span for miles. It can just come out of nowhere and last for weeks and months. So if we all kind of just, do our part to make it a little less phosphorusy in the ocean, that would be awesome. So not all dinoflagellates are bad. Red tide is Carina brevis, because it has a brevitoxin, right? Depletes the oxygen, not good. But not all of them. There are these amazing blue ones. These are the blue-green algae you've probably heard about. And they glow, they bioluminesce. So where does this bioluminescence come from, and why do they have it? They get this, it's actually a survival adaptation that the dinoflagellates have adapted to. They release this enzyme that creates the glow, which is kind of like a firefly. I don't know if you guys have ever seen fireflies, but every now and then they just glow, and it's just a chemical reaction that occurs, and it's supposed to ward off predators. but it just looks beautiful. These are them under microscopes. They kind of look like fortune cookies, but you can actually kayak and go in different places of Florida where the bioluminescence occurs. It does flourish in seasons. So during like the spring, summer months, the dinoflagellates are more prominent, and then the comb jellies are more prominent in like the fall, winter kind of era, but they also bioluminesce. So if you want, you can go up to like Rainbow Springs. I think you can do the kayaking for the dinoflagellates. It's absolutely beautiful. And then this is one of my favorite videos. Okay, that was just a quick little tidbit, but surfing the bioluminescence is super cool. And those are the same thing, except these ones don't hurt the environment, right? Okay, so these are, you can actually get them and grow them, which I just so happen to do. Let me just stop sharing for a quick second. Okay, I'm back. So just gonna take a little pit stop. These are actually my dinoflagellates. I grow them, they glow. They're not gonna glow right now because they're not in their cycle, but you shake them around, they glow. It's beautiful. It's very fun to see them because you can go to the ocean, you can go to the beach, you can look in the water and there'll be like blue sparkling flecks all over, and it's just so cool and beautiful that nature can do that. Like, oh my gosh, they can glow. It's like, how cool is that? Right? So I've been growing these for like about 2 years now. I get them from Carolina Biological Supply Company. They send me dinoflagellates. I study them. I see what kind of nutrients happens. I test their pH and stuff like that. Just, you know, but I just want to share that. You can get them if you want. You don't have to, but let me share my screen again. Okay, so there's a poll that has a couple questions from the presentation. Let me try to find it. I think I have to stop sharing to pull it up. Okay. Can you see it? I think it's there. Launch polling. So I'll give you guys about like 5-10 minutes to answer the questions. It's okay if they're not right. It's not a test, just to test your knowledge, see what you gain, see what you learned. Okay, so I'm gonna go through and we're gonna go through the quiz right now just to talk about it a little bit, see why we got some answers that we did. Okay, so the first one, red tide is a harmful algae bloom. That's true, everyone answered true. That's awesome, I'm so glad we all are aware. So which nutrient influences red tide the most? The answer is phosphorus. Nitrates are more influential towards other phytoplanktons, especially in the ocean. So nitrates are commonly more found in the ocean rather than lakes and like different kind of freshwater waterways where red tides and dinoflagellates tend to coagulate the most. But they do also use nitrates, but phosphorus is the most influential. So red tide is harmful only to marine life. This is false. It's harmful to the ecosystem and to people. The reason for this being is that the red tides can cause reef smothering as well as depleting the oxygen. So the reef smothering can damage seagrasses because they're not able to photosynthesize anymore. So when there is a red tide, we saw that picture of all of the red bloom just covering up a reef. So the reef isn't able to photosynthesize, therefore it's not getting any food, and then they can be really damaged that way. And the toxins can affect people if you're too close to the water during the red tide. So which type of fertilizers help prevent red tide? Phosphorus-free fertilizers. Nitrogen-free fertilizers, they don't really help your plants as much because your plants do need nitrogen to grow. Not so much phosphorus because it is a limited resource. They don't need as much of it as that are in some fertilizers right now. Okay. I'm going to go through you guys' questions now that we're in the chat. Okay, So the first question is, the video said that it's linked to Lake Okeechobee. Do they get red in the lake, or is it causing red tide in the ocean somehow? Yes, so what happens in Lake Okeechobee is they get a lot of blue-green algae. So blue-green algae is really prominent in that area just because that's where that species specifically likes to flourish. The runoff from the agriculture and all of the nutrients that are being run into Lake Okeechobee then feed into the ocean, where the red tide Carina brevis dinoflagellates tend to thrive the most because they are a marine-based species. So yeah, Lake Okeechobee is very involved in a lot of the algal blooms because it does feed right into the ocean, and all of those nutrients are so close to Lake Okeechobee because right around it is all those farms. And where do all those farms just like to run into? Right into that lake. And then they just leave the canals and go right to the ocean. So they all, because of the Everglades is a water cleaning system, everything kind of feeds into each other. So that's why in Florida we have to be very careful about what we put into the soil. So why do these dinoflagellates glow? Is it for food and mating? Why don't the red tide glow? Red tide doesn't, they do glow in some areas like San Diego. I know that the red tide species glows just because it gets darker there quicker, if that makes sense. So the bioluminescence is from an enzyme that is released when the dinoflagellates are stressed. So when the water moves or if there's a change in the pressure somehow, they release this enzyme that creates the glow. So the glow is to warn off predators, and it's supposed to, it's supposed to warn off predators, but dinoflagellates don't really have natural predators other than like primary consumers. So certain fish and stuff like that. But they don't really use it so much for mating because they use binary fission, so they just split apart when they mate. They don't actually mate with each other, and they photosynthesize. Yeah, but in San Diego, some types of the red tides do glow. I have seen some videos of it, but in Florida, it doesn't. I don't know why. It just doesn't sometimes. Red tide is mostly worse on the East Coast than the West. I mean, the West Coast than the East Coast because it's right next to that river that leads right into it. I forget exactly the name. I know Carly does.
The Caloosahatchee River.
That's what it is, the Caloosahatchee River. So the Caloosahatchee River, it is, I'm not too sure why they use that one, but that's just where all that runoff comes from. All that agricultural runoff just leads right into the Caloosahatchee, right into the Gulf. And because it's so, there's not as much movement in that water, the algae doesn't get as dispersed as quickly as the East Coast. Is it more expensive to produce fertilizers without phosphorus? You know, that is a great question. I am not sure why they choose to put phosphorus in the fertilizers if it causes runoff. A lot of it is just they didn't know, or they don't know why. Sometimes like when they create things like that are bad for the environment, they don't see the effects. So then they just keep producing them. It's a money thing. But it's not more expensive, actually less expensive to create phosphorus-free fertilizers because you're putting less nutrients in it. Your grass will still grow and all your plants will still grow just fine because they don't technically need all that fertilizer to grow. It's just to make them grow more quickly and more rapidly, pretty much. You're just speeding up the process, but the process doesn't necessarily need to be speeded up. So phosphorus-free fertilizers are just as good. How did I get into dinoflagellates? Well, when I knew I wanted to be a marine biologist since like second grade, asked my parents, it's all I talk about. And I started learning about red tide. In my speech class, I was supposed to, one of my assignments was to create a presentation based on a problem that I was really passionate about. And when I first moved to Florida and learned about red tide and saw what it did and how it was affecting the environment, I just, it made me so sad because it's caused by human pollution, and I just really wanted to study more about it because the dinoflagellates to me are just very interesting. I love how they glow. They're so tiny, but they're just so beautiful all together. And they just are very interesting to me, I guess, with the algae blooms. And it's such a key role in the environment that can be overlooked because a lot of people tend to focus on corals, which is amazing. Corals are beautiful. We need them. But just, I don't know, I wanted to do something a little different and just veer off the path a little bit. And the dinoflagellates, they just spark joy. Thank you, that was awesome. Oh, thank you. So, if anyone else has any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
So I think there's just one from Wendy that says, are there any movements to get more legislation to prevent red tides? And how can we help pass / enforce these new laws?
Okay. Well, if you are very passionate about red tide, as I am, the Surfrider Foundation is providing tons of support towards red tide. They are really doing a lot to try to study it, to try to see if there's any natural things that we can do to try to clean it up faster, to try and get it to spread less, and really just making sure you elect the right people who can help with your area forcing legislations and trying to enforce stricter policies on what types of fertilizers can be used and where and why it's so important. So raising awareness to the community about something and then bringing it to your elected officials is the best way to go about that situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So are nitrates still bad for other algae blooms or bad for them in general, or only phosphorus for all things in the ocean? Too much of anything is really bad. That's always my go-to. The reason why I harp so much on phosphorus is because it naturally is a very limited resource, which is why these algal blooms are able to use just a little bit to grow so fast, because it's like coffee to them, I guess. You just give them a little bit and they're just whoo, up the door, running, multiplying like crazy. For nitrates, however, it's more, they're found more often, so they use them less, if that makes sense. It's less of a limited resource, so it's not as harmful. And it can just be filtered out through other plants as well, a lot better than phosphorus can, especially in the ocean per se, because phosphorus is used by, how do I explain that right? It can be used more by like less in the water for phosphorus. Nitrate is primarily like a very aquatic nutrient, whereas phosphorus is more of a terrestrial nutrient. So when you kind of cross them, it can create some imbalance. So avoiding the imbalance altogether is the best. Well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
All right, I think you hit them all, Taylor. That was awesome. Scary because red tide, but very informative, especially if you live in Florida, especially if you go to the beach on either coast. It's one issue that just keeps popping up. Yeah, so thank you so much. If you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to shoot us an email if you think about something you want to know about red tide later on, and we will get back to you. Next week, the 27th, we have Dylan Terps with us, and she will be talking all about the Everglades National Park. Same time, same place, same link. So join us next Saturday at 1 p.m. To learn all about the Everglades, which kind of ties into what Taylor was talking about, which is perfect because like she said, the flow of the water, especially here in South Florida, is connected with Lake Okeechobee as well as the Everglades. Oh, I see a hand raise. Let's see. Who is it? Ira? I'm gonna let you talk. You ready for it? I'm doing it. Oh, that's not you. It might be a false.
It was kind of accidental that we pressed the button, but I just wanted to say that I've seen the algae fluoresce, and it's stunning. And if you're ever on a cruise ship, you can flush the toilet, and the flushing of the toilet excites the animal, and you could see it. So you turn the light on, of course, but I thought I'd just throw that in because I think it's terrific. Thank you.
Very cool. I did not know that.
I didn't know that either. That's amazing.
Awesome. All right, you guys. Well, thank you for joining. And again, thank you, Taylor. This was awesome. We will edit this and post it to YouTube within the next couple days, so you guys can always watch it again or share with all of your friends. And then hopefully we will see you again here next week at 1 p.m. See you guys. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Taylor. See you.